And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
About as perfect as an end to the campaign as we could get there in that concession speech, Crystal, pablum, and whatever the hell that was.
The vibes are very
about
like
the stars.
Yeah, I mean, the vibes to me are very like 2016 Resistance Lib.
Man.
And, you know, I don't think that the energy from the Democratic base is going to be quite the same. Because, I mean, for one, they're exhausted, right?
Yeah.
And for number two, you know, back in 2016, it felt like it could be just a one-off.
Yes.
Like a fluke. Okay, you had the Comey thing, and Hillary was a bad candidate, and Russian interference, and whatever. Now it's like, no, okay, no, this wasn't a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, people aren't just rejecting Democrats. They're doing that. They're also embracing this particular candidate. I mean, he outperformed every Republican on the ballot.
Yes.
So let's reckon with that too, and what that says. But you know, on the Democratic side, I see Elizabeth Warren put out like kind of a similar vibe of statement that was like, let's not point fingers. It's like, when is the time to point fingers?
Yeah,
if not right now. Like
Matt Stoller had a great tweet. He was like, actually, right now is the exact right time to point fingers and for recriminations,
yes.
bitter recriminations.
Like that's like now is the time. Your party has been burned down to the ashes.
Yes.
Thoroughly repudiated in state after state, county after county, demographic group after demographic group across the country. And there's no one to blame. There's no one, you know, there's no boogeyman out there that you can just point your finger at and say, oh, it was their fault. So, you know, now is the time to try to learn those lessons. But, you know, I think that they will learn all the wrong lessons. I think that's already, we see them moving in that direction. But the other piece with Kamala's speech, I'm curious your thoughts. Like, I think she's delusional enough to believe that she's still part of the future of the Democratic Party.
That's actually what I wanted to highlight. So an important part of her speech actually was her really laying the groundwork for the possible future run. So I have a direct quote here. Kamala, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. And she says, I'm so proud of the race that we ran, the way that we ran it. We have been intentional about building community and building coalitions. But the most important was really about the not conceding the fight and continuing, or not conceding, I'm conceding the election, not conceding the fight. And I really do think that she is trying to position herself as a future of the resistance. And this is actually a very stupid bet, in my opinion, because it's like you just said, the quote unquote resistance is not going to be the same. Last time around, they had two pillars that they could correctly cling to.
Right.
Oh, sorry, one was correct, the other was bullshit.
Delusional.
The first one was the popular vote and the one-off thing, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
that's fair,
right?
right? It actually did win the popular vote. Hillary did. So they could talk about that. They're like, well, it wasn't a rejection of us. It was just a couple of ways. The swing state, Trump is a one-off, et cetera. Number two also was Russiagate, is they were like, this is fundamentally like an illegitimate president. But so obviously Russiagate turned out to be bullshit. And also, frankly, the entire like, this is a one-off thing is also turned out to be bullshit. So when you put those two things together, she is making a very incorrect bet. Let's be very honest here. This is a candidate who has performed worse than Hillary Clinton, right? This is a candidate who was thoroughly rejected by the popular vote and a landslide victory in the Electoral College. You know, in the British system, somebody like her, it's over. You resign. You're gone. You know, at best, you pop up somewhere for constabulatory or whatever they call it over there, and that's it. You're just some backbencher, and we never hear about you again. Fundamentally, it's an incorrect bet because it's like you just said, the liberal mind and all that is both exhausted from 8 years of quote unquote resistance, but also there is a baseline acceptance this time of the Trump victory and of the thesis that this is, you know, Peter Baker over at the New York Times, he's a guy I respect. He does a pretty good job. And he was like, look, elites made a fundamental bet that Trump is not who we are. And he's like, actually, this is Donald Trump's America, and we are the ones who don't know what the hell is going on. It's kind of a trite take, but fundamentally, like what Kamala is betting on in terms of her resistance, it cannot look like her because her style of politics so thoroughly failed. Her entire theory of quote-unquote resistance was incorrect from basically the entire time around. So whatever does come next, obviously there's going to be a lot of soul-searching and like that inside of the party, but she cannot seek the nomination again because her electoral track record now is 2 times failure. She failed in the 2019 Democratic primary. She did not win or even get close to the Iowa caucuses because of how she flamed out. For some reason, mostly because of like 2020 BLM craziness, she gets selected as the vice presidential pick. One of the worst modern picks, obviously, I think we can say. And then there's no primary system that happens, and she runs a terrible campaign in addition to having inherit the baggage of Joe Biden, and she loses in a historic margin. Like, it is over. And in any modern sense of like how these things should go, it cannot be allowed. Now, the big question is whether Democratic elites will allow this nonsense, because right now, all the recriminations are on Joe Biden, which we'll get to, but I haven't seen enough of Kamala herself and her own role in it. So she seems to think that she can just coast on it was Biden's fault that I lost, not mine.
I've been saying the whole time that Democrats are never going to run a woman again.
Right.
And I do think like the first woman president is going to be a Republican. Like I think that is pretty clear at this point. But I mean, I agree with all the critiques of Kamala's campaign, right? I mean, the thing I've been saying is like too much Mark Cuban and Liz Cheney and not enough Sean Fain and Bernie Sanders, right? But I think it's sort of unfair to lay all the blame at her feet, because it would almost be too easy to just look at like, oh, you made this tactical wrong decision, you gave this tactically wrong answer. All of that is, worthy of debate and discussion, et cetera. But there's a deeper problem with the Democratic Party. And, the medium-term issue is that even though they claim to be fighting for democracy, they're actually very scared of democracy, which you see both in the refusal to have a Democratic primary this time around, in the refusal to have like even an open convention after Joe Biden drops out of the race. If you go back further, you see it in the crushing of the Bernie Sanders movement, an organic grassroots Democratic movement that sprung up, that they moved heaven and earth to make sure that they crushed and put their finger on the scales and rigged the primaries back in 2016. And if you think about it, the last time that they actually allowed a democratic process to play out was 2008 with Obama and Hillary.
Yep.
They got the candidate that the Democratic base actually wanted, and lo and behold, turned out that guy was a really good politician, and he won 2 terms, and probably, if he had been allowed to run for more, probably would have continued to win. And I say this not as the biggest fan of Obama, but just, respect of his particular political talent. So there's a democracy problem in the Democratic Party. I really don't see anyone reckoning with that. But there's also an ideological problem in the Democratic Party. And, Kamala is reflective of that ideological problem. Neoliberalism has been rejected. The right has offered through Trumpism their vision and their story about what went wrong and what to do next. The left offered out of Occupy their own version of that story of, who was to blame, what went wrong, and how to fix it. And it was compelling. It was compelling to a lot of the very same people who now are supporting Donald Trump, including like Joe Rogan being the sort of like, figurehead of that shift, but many Latino voters, many working class voters, et cetera. And, I would love to fantasize that, now they're going to realize the error of their ways and there's going to be a new movement that springs up. But I just don't believe it, because they've already crushed that movement so thoroughly. The people who previously were part of it, many of them are gone. They're disillusioned. They're either like just liberals now, or they're on the right. And so I don't know, like there is no left to speak of that could recreate that energy. So, that's where we are. One thing, Sagar, I wanted to get your view on is, let's put this incumbent party graphic up on the screen, guys, the second element that we have here.
Yeah, this is very important.
This is important, and it is an important part of the story of what went wrong here. This is Derek Thompson tweeted this out, and he said, for the first time since World War II, every governing party facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share. 2024 Democrats are the red dot, absolutely critical context to any postmortem. And I think that is true, but I also think that you can use that to just explain away the failures of Kamala herself, the Democratic Party, the ideology underlying, because that's the other thing is like, well, what were the governing parties that were rejected? And many of them were neoliberal parties. And it's one more reflection of the fact that the public is done with an ideology that has been proven to be broken, putting markets above human beings and, individual values. And Democrats have